Jimin's heartbreaking words shatter Jungkook's silence, leading to one unexpected choice that changes their lives forever. The silver ring struck the wooden floor with a sharp metallic sound, just as Jimin's trembling voice broke the silence. "You never chose me." The words were barely louder than a whisper, yet they echoed through the quiet apartment with enough force to stop Jungkook from breathing. Outside, rain hammered against the windows, turning the city into a blur of pale lights and dark shadows. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline, but neither of them noticed. The storm inside the room had already become far louder. Jimin stood near the doorway, soaked from the rain. His damp blonde hair clung to his forehead, and tiny drops slid from the sleeves of his oversized sweater onto the wooden floor. His fingers trembled, not because of the cold, but because he had finally spoken the sentence he had buried for years. Jungkook looked at him without moving. The ring at his feet was the promise he had never managed to explain. His chest tightened until every breath felt like broken glass. Jimin laughed softly. It was not happiness. It was the painful laugh of someone who had run out of tears. "I kept waiting," Jimin said, his eyes refusing to leave Jungkook's face. "Every single time. I thought maybe today you'd look at me the way you look at everyone else." Jungkook opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Words had always abandoned him whenever they mattered most. Silence had become his oldest habit. When he was afraid, he stayed quiet. When he loved someone, he stayed quiet. When he thought protecting someone meant hiding the truth, he stayed quiet. Now that silence was destroying everything. Jimin slowly wiped the rainwater from his cheek, although neither of them knew whether it was rain or tears. "You know what's funny?" he whispered. "I stopped asking you to choose me a long time ago." Sentence hit harder than any accusation, because it was true. Jungkook remembered every moment, every canceled dinner, every unread message, every birthday he arrived late because someone else needed him, every smile Jimin forced whenever Jungkook apologized, every apology that sounded exactly the same. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The words had become meaningless. Across the room, an old record player continued spinning even though the music had already ended. Only the quiet scratching sound remained, filling the silence between them like an invisible wound. Jimin took one slow step backward. "Finally understand." "You don't." Jungkook's voice finally appeared. It was rough, almost unfamiliar. "You don't understand anything." Jimin looked at him with tired eyes. "Then tell me." Jungkook couldn't, because the truth was uglier than any lie. 3 years ago, he had promised someone he would never reveal the secret that had changed all of their lives. A promise he had kept even while watching the person he loved slowly drift away. Every day he carried that promise like chains around his heart. Every day he wondered if silence was still kindness, or simply cowardice. Jimin waited. Seconds passed. The rain continued falling. Jungkook lowered his eyes again. The answer never came. Jimin smiled one last time. It was heartbreak wearing the shape of acceptance. "I knew it." He turned toward the door. For a heartbeat, Jungkook saw the future waiting beyond that doorway, an apartment without Jimin's quiet humming in the kitchen. No warm coffee waiting on sleepy mornings. No forgotten hoodies hanging beside his own. No soft laughter filling lonely evenings. Only empty rooms, empty chairs, empty silence. The realization struck him with terrifying clarity. If Jimin walked away now, there would never be another chance. His heartbeat thundered against his ribs. The fear he had hidden for years finally became stronger than the promise he had protected. Before he could think, before doubt could stop him, Jungkook crossed the room. His footsteps echoed loudly against the floor. Jimin barely had time to turn around before Jungkook caught his wrist. The warmth of Jimin's skin shocked him, as though he had forgotten what it felt like to hold onto the person he loved. Jimin tried to pull away. "What are you doing?" Jungkook looked directly into his eyes for the first time in years. He stopped hiding, his voice shook. "I was wrong." Jimin froze. "I thought protecting you meant keeping everything from you." His fingers tightened gently around Jimin's hand. "But all I've done is make you believe you were never enough." Tears gathered in Jimin's eyes again. Jungkook slowly bent down. He picked up the silver ring from the floor. The metal felt cold against his fingertips. For years, he had carried it in his pocket, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect day, the perfect future. He suddenly understood something painfully simple. Perfect moments never arrived. Only honest ones did. Without another word, Jungkook carefully took Jimin's trembling hand. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't make a speech. He simply slid the silver ring onto Jimin's finger. The room became impossibly quiet. Even the rain seemed distant. Jimin stared at the ring as though it couldn't possibly be real. His breathing became uneven. "What?" Jungkook's eyes were wet now. I never stopped choosing you. His voice cracked. Just kept choosing fear first. Jimin looked at him for a very long time, not with anger, not with forgiveness, but with the overwhelming exhaustion of someone whose heart had carried too much hope for too many years. Slowly, almost instinctively, he raised his hand. His fingers brushed against Jungkook's cheek. The warmth of that gentle touch unraveled every wall Jungkook had spent years building around himself. For the first time since they met, he allowed himself to cry without shame. No excuses, no lies, no silence. Only tears. Outside, the rain gradually softened into a quiet drizzle. The clouds above the city slowly parted, allowing the faint glow of dawn to spill across the apartment floor. It illuminated two people who had spent years standing only a few steps apart, separated not by distance, but by words left unspoken. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. Old wounds would not disappear overnight. Trust would need time. Healing would demand courage from them both. Yet as the first sunlight reflected from the silver ring resting on Jimin's hand, they finally understood that love had never needed perfection. It had only needed the courage to be spoken aloud before silence stole everything. Jimin woke before sunrise, though he could not remember sleeping. The silver ring still rested on his finger. It caught the pale morning light spilling through the curtains, gleaming so softly that it almost felt like a dream waiting to disappear. He stared at it for several long moments before quietly curling his fingers into a fist. Some promises looked beautiful. Not all of them survived reality. The apartment was unusually silent. No music drifted from the living room. No smell of fresh coffee floated through the air. Only the distant murmur of traffic beyond the rain-soaked windows reminded him that the world had continued moving while his own seemed frozen. He stepped into the hallway barefoot. Jungkook stood in the kitchen with his back turned, absently stirring a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Dark circles framed his eyes, and the sleeves of his sweater were rolled unevenly, as though he had dressed without paying attention. He looked like someone who had spent the entire night arguing with himself. Without turning around, he quietly said, "You're awake." Jimin answered with nothing more than a soft hum. Silence settled between them again, but this silence felt different from the ones before. It was no longer filled with anger. Instead, it carried uncertainty. Jungkook finally turned. For a brief second, relief crossed his face when he saw Jimin still wearing the ring. Then he noticed the hesitation in Jimin's eyes. The relief faded. "I know," Jungkook murmured. "A ring doesn't erase everything." Jimin lowered his gaze. "No, doesn't." His voice was calm, almost too calm. "You spent years letting me believe I wasn't enough." Every word landed gently, yet each one struck deeper than shouting ever could. "I kept wondering what I lacked, what Tiang had, what everyone else had." Jungkook closed his eyes. The familiar name still carried weight, not because of jealousy, because of guilt. It was never about him. "Then tell me what it was about." Again, Jungkook hesitated. His fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The memory he had locked away refused to stay buried. 3 years earlier, a hospital corridor stretched endlessly beneath cold white lights. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. Jungkook still remembered the sound of hurried footsteps and muffled voices behind closed doors. Taehyung had been sitting alone on a bench, his face pale, his hands stained with dried blood that wasn't his own. When Jungkook arrived, Taehyung looked up with empty eyes. "You can't tell Jimin." Those had been the first words, not hello, not thank you, just a desperate plea. Jungkook had frowned. "What happened?" Taehyung swallowed hard. "If he finds out, he'll blame himself." Jungkook demanded answers, but Taehyung remained silent until the doctor disappeared around the corner. Only then did he whisper the truth. The accident had never been random. Someone had deliberately tampered with the stage equipment during rehearsal. Jimin had been standing exactly where the lighting rig collapsed. Taehyung saw it first. Without thinking, he pushed Jimin away. The steel frame missed Jimin by inches. Instead, it struck Taehyung. Months of surgeries followed, months of rehabilitation, months of hiding the real reason from everyone. The company feared scandal. Managers buried the incident beneath carefully written statements. Reporters were told it was an equipment malfunction. Only a handful of people knew otherwise, among them Jungkook. Before entering surgery, Taehyung had grabbed Jungkook's wrist. "Promise me." "What?" "Don't let Jimin know." Never forgive himself. Jungkook remembered arguing, remembered insisting that Jimin deserved the truth. Taehyung simply smiled through unbearable pain. "Rather carry this forever than watch him break." Jungkook made the promise, a promise that slowly poisoned every relationship around him. Back in the present, he looked at Jimin. His heart pounded painfully. I wasn't protecting Taehyung. I was protecting the promise I made. Jimin's expression didn't change. You chose a promise over me. Jungkook couldn't deny it. Yes, the single word shattered something inside him. I thought I was doing the right thing. Jimin walked toward the window. Outside, children laughed as puddles reflected the brightening sky. Life looked so simple from a distance. I blamed myself anyway, Jimin whispered. I thought I had done something wrong. Kept comparing myself to someone who wasn't even competing with me. Shoulders trembled. I lost confidence. I stopped believing I deserved your love. Jungkook felt every sentence like another crack spreading across his chest. If he had spoken sooner, how much pain could they have avoided? He slowly approached until they stood side by side, not touching, not yet. Sorry, Jimin smiled sadly. You've said that many times. I know, this time. Jungkook inhaled shakily. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Jimin studied his face carefully. The fear was still there. The guilt was still there. But for the first time, there were no walls hiding either of them. Only honesty, raw and imperfect. Jimin glanced down at the ring once more. It no longer felt like an answer. It felt like the beginning of a difficult journey neither of them had expected. Very slowly, he reached for Jungkook's hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they still remembered each other despite everything that had happened. I don't know if I can trust you completely today. Jungkook nodded. I wouldn't expect you to. But, Jimin's voice softened. I want to see whether the man standing in front of me now is different from the one who kept hiding behind silence. A small, fragile smile appeared on Jungkook's face. I am. Because the past had changed. But because he finally understood that love could not survive inside secrets forever. The morning sun climbed higher above the city, filling the apartment with warm, golden light. For the first time in years, neither of them felt the need to pretend they were unhurt. Healing had finally begun, not through grand gestures or perfect words, but through the quiet courage of telling the truth and choosing, day by day, not to hide from it anymore. The afternoon sunlight painted long golden lines across the apartment floor, but neither Jimin nor Jungkook noticed how quietly the hours had passed. They sat across from each other at the small dining table, two untouched cups of coffee growing cold between them. For years they had spoken around the truth. Now they had finally reached it, yet the truth itself had become another mountain neither of them knew how to climb. Jimin slowly traced the rim of his cup with his fingertip. When did you buy the ring? Jungkook looked down at the silver band resting on Jimin's hand. A little over 2 years ago, Jimin blinked. 2 years. Jungkook nodded. I carried it almost every day. He gave a quiet, almost embarrassed smile. It stayed in my jacket pocket through concerts, flights, rehearsals, and vacations. Kept thinking there would be a perfect moment. There never was. Jimin let out a soft breath. You had the courage to buy it. Not enough courage to tell me the truth. Jungkook accepted the words without defending himself. Right. Honesty surprised Jimin more than any excuse ever could. There was no attempt to soften his mistakes. No effort to shift the blame, only acceptance. For the first time in years, Jungkook was allowing himself to be seen exactly as he was. Flawed, afraid, human. Jimin quietly stood and walked toward the bookshelf near the living room. His fingers brushed across framed photographs collected over countless seasons, concerts, birthdays, late-night dinners, vacations by the sea. In nearly every picture, Jungkook was smiling. So was he. Looking at them now, Jimin wondered how two people could appear so happy while carrying so much silence. His gaze stopped on one photograph. It had been taken after a charity concert. Taehyung stood between them, laughing with his head thrown back. Jungkook noticed the photograph too. I avoided looking at that picture. Jimin turned. Every time I saw it, Jungkook swallowed. I remembered the promise. Jimin carefully lifted the frame. I used to hate this picture. Jungkook looked at him in surprise. I thought whenever you looked at Taehyung, you saw someone you wished I could become. A painful silence followed. Jungkook slowly walked over. He stood beside Jimin, looking at the smiling faces frozen inside the photograph. Never wanted you to become anyone else. His voice was steady. I only wanted you. Jimin closed his eyes. Those words were everything he had wanted to hear years ago. Back then, they would have erased every insecurity. Now, they became the first stitches closing wounds that had been left open for far too long. They still hurt, Jimin admitted. I know. They probably will for a while. I know. I don't want you pretending everything is fine. Won't. Jimin nodded. Neither of them smiled. There was something strangely comforting about that. Real healing rarely looked beautiful. Sometimes it looked like two exhausted people choosing honesty over comfort. The apartment suddenly buzzed with the vibration of a phone resting on the table. Jungkook glanced at the screen. His expression stiffened. Jimin noticed immediately. "Who is it?" Jungkook hesitated before turning the screen toward him. The caller ID displayed a familiar name. Tiang. Jimin looked at the phone for several silent seconds, then he looked back at Jungkook. "Answer it." Jungkook searched his eyes. "Are you sure? If we're done hiding." Jimin said quietly, "Then let's really be done." Jungkook answered the call. "Hello," on the other end, Taehyung's warm voice carried an unfamiliar heaviness. "Jungkook, I just heard." There was a pause. "You finally told him, didn't you?" Jungkook glanced at Jimin. "Yes." Another silence. Then Taehyung exhaled, almost sounding relieved. "I should have stopped you from keeping that promise a long time ago." Jimin's eyes widened. He hadn't expected those words. "I thought protecting him meant keeping him in the dark." Taehyung continued softly. "But I was wrong. One heals from a lie." Jimin felt something inside him loosen. For years, he had unknowingly blamed Taehyung. Now he heard nothing but regret in the older man's voice. "Oh, Jimin, an apology." Jungkook looked toward him. Jimin slowly nodded. "You don't owe me anything," Jimin said loudly enough for Taehyung to hear. "You were trying to protect me. So was Jungkook. All three of us ended up getting hurt." A quiet laugh came from the other end of the line. It sounded tired. "But maybe," Taehyung said, "it's time we stop carrying old guilt." After the call ended, the apartment felt lighter, not because every problem had disappeared, but because another misunderstanding had finally dissolved. Jimin carefully placed the photograph back on the shelf. This time, he did not turn it face down. He left it standing where it belonged, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that even memories built on silence could find new meaning once the truth was finally spoken. Jungkook stepped closer. Their shoulders brushed gently. Neither of them pulled away. Outside, the last rain clouds drifted beyond the city skyline, revealing an endless blue sky. It was the first clear afternoon they had seen in days. Jimin looked through the window, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on his face. For the first time in a long while, the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something they could build together, one honest conversation at a time.
The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in cool air and pale sunlight that filtered through the apartment windows. Jimin was the first to wake. For a brief moment, he forgot everything that had happened. Then his eyes fell to the silver ring resting on his finger. His heart no longer tightened the way it had yesterday. Instead, it ached with cautious hope. He found Jungkook standing on the balcony, leaning against the railing with a mug of coffee in his hands. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth from the gardens below, and the city was only beginning to stir. "You couldn't sleep?" Jimin asked softly. Jungkook smiled without looking away from the horizon. "I kept thinking about how many mornings I wasted." Jimin stepped beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence no longer felt like an enemy. It had become a place where neither of them felt pressured to pretend. After a long pause, Jungkook finally said, "There's something else I never told you." Jimin turned toward him. "No, you probably don't want more surprises. If we're rebuilding this, I don't want to hide anything anymore." Jimin nodded. "I'm listening." Jungkook lowered his eyes. "A year ago I almost left." Jimin frowned. "Left?" "I was offered a chance to work overseas for several years. I accepted it." The words landed heavily. Jimin felt his stomach tight. "You accepted?" "I did." Then Jungkook let out a slow breath. "I canceled it 2 days before the announcement." Jimin stared at him. "You never told me." "I couldn't." "Why?" Jungkook looked at him with complete honesty. "Because the thought of living in another country without you terrified me. I realized I could survive success. I couldn't survive losing the person I loved." Jimin searched his face, looking for any trace of exaggeration. There was none, only quiet sincerity. "So you stayed." "I stayed, instead of fighting for us." Jungkook gave a bitter smile. "I kept hiding behind the same silence." Jimin shook his head gently. "You really believed silence could protect people." "My father believed that." Jungkook's voice softened. He never spoke about his pain. Believed carrying everything alone made him strong. "I grew up thinking love meant enduring quietly." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't realize that silence can become another kind of abandonment." Jimin felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he wasn't only seeing Jungkook's mistakes. He was seeing where they had begun. It didn't excuse the pain, but it helped him understand it. He reached out and took Jungkook's hand. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." Jungkook's eyes shimmered. "I know. I'm still learning how." A gentle knock interrupted the moment. Both of them turned toward the apartment door. Jungkook frowned. "We aren't expecting anyone." He opened the door. Standing outside was an elderly woman holding a small cardboard box wrapped with faded blue ribbon. She smiled warmly. "Good morning. I believe this belongs to you." Jungkook looked confused. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" The woman shook her head. "No. Someone asked me to keep this safe until the right time." She handed him the box. There were very specific instructions. Jimin stepped closer. "Who?" The woman smiled again. "A man who believes some truths should wait until hearts were ready." Before either of them could ask another question, she wished them well and quietly walked down the hallway. Jungkook closed the door. The apartment fell silent again. He carefully untied the ribbon. Inside the box rested an old leather journal. Its corners were worn from age. A folded envelope lay on top. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words: for Jimin and Jungkook together. Jungkook's breath caught. Know this handwriting? Jimin looked closer. His eyes widened. It's Taehyung's. Neither of them moved for several moments. The journal felt unexpectedly heavy in Jungkook's hands, as though it carried years of unspoken memories. Finally, Jimin nodded. Open it. Jungkook unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The first line was enough to bring silence back into the room. If you're reading this together, then you finally found the courage that I hoped both of you would discover. Jimin instinctively reached for Jungkook's hand. Whatever waited inside the journal, they would read it together. Not as two people divided by fear, but as two hearts that had finally chosen honesty over silence. Jungkook unfolded the letter with careful hands, afraid that even the slightest movement might damage the fragile paper. The ink had faded slightly with time, but Taehyung's handwriting was unmistakable, steady, elegant, and calm. Jimin moved closer until their shoulders touched. Without thinking, they leaned toward the page together. Jungkook began to read aloud. If you're reading this together, then my greatest wish has already come true. It means neither of you is facing the truth alone anymore. A long silence settled over the room. Jungkook continued. No, both of you will probably be angry with me. You have every right to be. I asked Jungkook to keep a promise that was never fair to him. I thought I was protecting Jimin, but I was really protecting myself from seeing someone I cared about carry unnecessary guilt. Jimin lowered his eyes. His fingers tightened around the edge of the letter. Jimin, the letter continued, you have always blamed yourself too easily. Even when something wasn't your fault, you searched for reasons to carry the burden. That is one of the things I admired most about you, and one of the things that worried me most. A tear slid silently down Jimin's cheek. He remembered countless nights wondering whether he had somehow failed the people he loved. He had never realized that others had seen that part of him so clearly. Jungkook swallowed before reading the next paragraph. Jungkook, you once told me that silence was easier than hurting someone with the truth. I should have told you then that silence has its own way of hurting people. Instead, I accepted your promise because I was afraid. For that, I am deeply sorry. Jungkook closed his eyes. The apology reached places inside him that words had never touched before. For years, he had blamed only himself. Hearing Taehyung accept part of the responsibility did not erase the past, but it eased a weight he had carried alone. Beneath the letter lay the old journal. Jimin carefully opened it. The first pages were filled with dates, hospital visits, physical therapy appointments, small notes about pain levels. Some pages described victories that seemed insignificant to anyone else. Today I climbed 3 stairs without help. Today my hand stopped shaking long enough to hold a cup. Today I laughed for the first time since the accident. Jimin's vision blurred. He had never known, not because Taehyung wanted praise, but because he had hidden every struggle behind a smile. As they turned another page, they found a short entry written months after the accident. Jungkook visited today. He looked exhausted. I can see what this promise is doing to him. Every time he smiles around Jimin, his eyes tell a different story. If I ever get the chance, I'll tell him to let the truth go. Jungkook covered his face with one hand. I should have listened to my heart. Jimin gently rested a hand on his shoulder. You were trying to keep your word. I was. Jungkook's voice broke, but I forgot that keeping one promise was breaking another. He looked at Jimin with eyes full of regret. I was breaking the promise I made the day we first met. Jimin tilted his head. What promise? Jungkook smiled faintly through his tears. When I never said out loud, no matter what happened, I would never let you feel alone. Jimin's breath caught. For years, loneliness had been exactly what he had felt, not because Jungkook stopped loving him, but because love had become trapped behind fear. He stepped closer. There were days, Jimin admitted quietly, when I was surrounded by people, yet I felt completely invisible. Jungkook lowered his head. I'm sorry. Jimin gently lifted Jungkook's chin. I know. Today, he offered a small smile. I don't feel invisible anymore. Apartment was quiet except for the rustle of turning pages. Near the back of the journal, a folded photograph slipped onto the floor. Jimin picked it up. It showed the 3 of them standing by the ocean years earlier. The sun was setting behind them. Taehyung had written something on the back. Happiest memories are never perfect. They're simply shared with the right people. Jimin looked at the photograph for a long moment before placing it carefully back inside the journal. He turned toward Jungkook. We can't change what happened. We can choose what happens next. Jungkook nodded, and this time, there won't be any more secrets. More silence, Jimin said. Jungkook smiled. No more silence. They stood together on the balcony a little later, watching the afternoon breeze ripple through the trees below. The journal rested safely on the table behind them, not as a reminder of old pain, but as a testament to everything they had survived. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer had to decide how their story ended. Side by side with the city stretching endlessly before them, Jimin and Jungkook quietly realized that love was not proven by never making mistakes. It was proven by having the courage to face those mistakes together, speak the truths that had once been feared, and choose each other again with open hearts. Several weeks passed, and life slowly settled into a rhythm that neither Jimin nor Jungkook had thought possible. The apartment no longer felt heavy with unspoken words. Instead, it echoed with ordinary moments, Jungkook humming while making breakfast, Jimin laughing when the pancakes came out misshapen, arguments over whose turn it was to water the plants. Late-night conversations that stretched until sunrise because neither of them wanted another day to end with unfinished thoughts. They were learning something new. Healing was rarely dramatic. More often, it was hidden inside small choices repeated every day. One afternoon, Jimin stood in front of the bookshelf where Taehyung's journal rested beside a row of photo albums. He gently ran his fingers across its worn leather cover. "I think it's time," he said quietly. Jungkook looked up from the sofa. "Time for what? I want to visit him." Jungkook understood immediately. Taehyung had been away for several months, volunteering at a rehabilitation center in a quiet coastal town. They had exchanged messages and occasional phone calls, but they had not seen each other since everything had changed. Jungkook smiled. "I'd like that." A few days later, they found themselves driving along a winding road beside the sea. The windows were open, letting in the scent of salt and wildflowers. The sky stretched endlessly above them, brilliant blue without a single cloud. Jimin rested his arm against the window, watching waves crash gently against the rocks below. "It's beautiful here." Jungkook nodded. He always loved places that were quiet. When they arrived at the rehabilitation center, they found Taehyung in the garden helping an elderly man plant young trees. He looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then Taehyung smiled. The same warm, familiar smile that had survived pain, surgeries, and years of regret. "You made it." Jimin crossed the distance first. Without saying a word, he wrapped his arms around Taehyung. The embrace was firm, steady, and full of everything words could never fully express. "I'm sorry," Jimin whispered. Taehyung gently shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. I spent years blaming you." "I know, I was wrong." Taehyung smiled softly. "We all were." Jungkook joined them, and for a brief moment the three of them stood together beneath the shade of the garden trees. The silence between them was peaceful now, no guilt, no resentment, only understanding. Later that afternoon, they sat on a wooden bench overlooking the ocean. The waves shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Taehyung glanced at the silver ring still resting on Jimin's finger. "So," he smiled teasingly, "finally get to see the ring." Jimin laughed, a genuine laugh that carried effortlessly on the sea breeze. "You knew?" Taehyung looked at Jungkook with amused eyes. "He showed it to me before he bought it." Jimin turned toward Jungkook in surprise. "Did?" Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. "I needed someone's opinion." And Taehyung chuckled. "I told him that if he waited for the perfect moment, he'd probably still be carrying it when he turned 80. Three of them laughed together. The sound drifted across the shoreline, blending with the rhythm of the waves. For the first time in years, the memory they shared wasn't overshadowed by secrets. As the sun slowly began to set, painting the ocean in shades of gold and crimson, Taehyung looked toward the horizon. "You know," he said quietly, "people think healing means forgetting what happened." Jimin listened. "But healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without letting the pain control you." Jungkook nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that." Taehyung smiled. "You both already do." The evening breeze grew cooler. Jimin reached for Jungkook's hand and Jungkook intertwined their fingers without hesitation. Neither of them needed grand promises anymore. The simple act of holding on was enough. As they prepared to leave, Taehyung handed the journal back to Jungkook. "It belongs with both of you now." Jungkook accepted it carefully. "We'll take good care of it." "I know." Drive home was quiet. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because every important word had already been spoken. Jimin leaned his head gently against Jungkook's shoulder as the last light of day disappeared beyond the horizon. Jungkook smiled and kissed the top of his hair. The road ahead stretched into the distance, illuminated by the warm glow of the car's headlights. For the first time in a very long while, neither of them feared what lay ahead. They had learned that love was not about choosing the perfect path. It was about choosing each other again and again, even after getting lost. And this time they drove forward together with nothing left hidden between them. Morning sunlight poured through the apartment windows, filling every corner with a quiet warmth that felt unfamiliar only because peace had once seemed impossible. Jimin stood in the kitchen, arranging fresh flowers into a small glass vase. It had become a new habit. Every Sunday he brought home flowers, not because there was a special occasion, but because he wanted ordinary days to feel worth celebrating. Behind him, Jungkook carefully set 2 cups of coffee on the table. "You always choose white lilies," he said with a smile. Jimin looked over his shoulder. "They remind me that even after the hardest storms, something gentle can still bloom." Jungkook walked closer. He wrapped his arms around Jimin from behind, resting his chin lightly on his shoulder. Neither of them hurried to speak. The silence between them no longer carried fear. It carried comfort. Months had passed since they had begun rebuilding what had almost been lost. There had been difficult conversations. Days when old memories returned unexpectedly. Moments when trust felt fragile. But every time uncertainty appeared, they chose to face it together instead of alone. That had become the foundation of everything. One evening, they returned to the beach where they had once laughed with Taehyung years before. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, reflecting the colors of the setting sun. Orange melted into pink. Pink faded into deep blue. The waves rolled onto the shore with the same steady rhythm they always had, as if reminding them that life continued no matter how broken yesterday had been. Taehyung was already there, sitting on a driftwood log with a gentle smile. He stood as they approached. "So," he said warmly, "you both look happier." Jimin smiled. "Still learning, aren't we all?" Taehyung replied. The three of them watched the sunset together. No one spoke for a long time. There was nothing left that demanded explanation. The past had found its place, not forgotten, not erased, but accepted. As darkness slowly settled over the sea, Tiang reached into his bag and handed them a small wooden frame. Inside was the old photograph they had found in the journal. On the back, beneath his earlier words, he had written one final sentence. People who truly love each other are not those who never break, but those who choose to rebuild together. Jimin traced the words with his thumb, his eyes shimmered. I think I'll keep this where we can see it every day. I hope you do, Taehyung answered. It isn't there to remind you of the pain. It's there to remind you that you survived it. Later that night, Jimin and Jungkook returned home. They placed the framed photograph beside the journal on the bookshelf. Next to it rested the silver ring's small velvet box, now empty because the ring had found the hand where it belonged. Jungkook looked at Jimin. There was a time when I thought loving someone meant protecting them from every painful truth. Jimin reached for his hand, and now Jungkook smiled softly. Now I know love means trusting someone enough to share both the truth and the fear. Jimin intertwined their fingers, and choosing each other anyway. Outside, rain began to fall again. It sounded almost identical to the rain from the night everything had nearly ended. But this time, neither of them felt afraid. Jimin opened the window slightly, letting the cool breeze drift into the room. The scent of rain mixed with the fragrance of the white lilies on the table. He smiled. Rain sounds different now. Jungkook nodded. It hasn't changed. They stood together by the window, watching countless drops dance beneath the city lights. The storm that had once witnessed heartbreak now became the quiet music of a new beginning. Some scars would always remain, some memories would always sting, but they no longer defined the future. Because forgiveness had replaced resentment, honesty had replaced silence, hope had replaced fear, and love, finally spoken without hesitation, had replaced every secret that once kept two hearts apart. As the lights of the city shimmered beneath the falling rain, Jimin rested his head against Jungkook's shoulder. Jungkook gently kissed his forehead. No dramatic promises were needed anymore. No perfect words remained to be spoken. Their greatest promise was found in the quiet life they had chosen to build together, one honest conversation, one shared sunrise, and one ordinary day at a time. And in that ordinary life they discovered the extraordinary truth they had searched for all along. Being chosen was never about a single moment. It was about waking up every day, looking at the same person, and choosing them again with an open heart. The end.